Okay, good day everyone. Welcome to today's pop session. My name is Alicia, and today we'll be exploring the role that volunteers can take in developing quality educational experiences that convey cultural peace principles. Today we are joined by a guest from our partners over at Earth Charter International. And as always, we welcome your thoughts, your comments, and your shared experiences at any time. Feel free to reach out to us at eotopop.net, that's eotopop.net, or even on our social media, whenever it suits you. And as a small reminder from last session, today's session is actually pre-recorded, so we're not actually open to live comment. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Christine Lacayo. She is the youth coordinator for Earth Charter International's Youth Network. And Christine will be sharing with you more about who she is and the work of Earth Charter.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Christine Lacayo. I was born and raised in the U.S., and my mother is from Costa Rica, where I am right now, and my father from Nicaragua. I studied environmental management and sustainable development in my master's program, and I'm very passionate about using visual media and communications and education to raise awareness on environmental issues. So I currently work here at the Earth Charter International, as Alicia has mentioned. We're located at the University for Peace in San Jose, Costa Rica, and I work here as the Youth Projects Coordinator. So I'd like to give you a little bit more insight on what the Earth Charter is and what I do here for the Youth Network. So the Earth Charter Initiative is a set of values and principles. It's an ethical framework to use in order to build a more just, peaceful, and sustainable future. And when I mention the initiative rather than the Earth Charter International, I'm talking about the Earth Charter movement, so the global network, the movement. The initiative is coordinated by the Earth Charter International, which is made up of an executive office, which is here, the ECI Secretariat, where I am right now with the full-time staff here. And it's also coordinated. It's also made up of the ECI Council, which are council members who help coordinate this initiative and manage the initiative. So as I mentioned, the initiative is a global movement. It's people, organizations, institutions, universities, governments using the network, using the Earth Charter to promote the Earth Charter principles and values and to use it in their everyday lives. The Earth Charter is centrally concerned with the transition to a more sustainable way of life, more sustainable lifestyle, and sustainable human development. We really like to, we say that we really embody a holistic view of sustainable development where the environment, the economy, and society are all working together, interlinked in balance. So just to give you a brief history, a little bit about how the Earth Charter was born. Very briefly, it was born out of the Earth Summit, the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 as part of the United Nations. And then after numerous drafts and consultations with input from people all over the world, it was later formally launched in June of 2000 at the Peace Palace in The Hague. So it was born within the UN and then kind of came out of the UN as part of the civil society movement. And so today the global network is made up of thousands of organizations, people, youth, or individuals, governments, as I mentioned already, who are working actively in their countries. And globally, we're active in more than 80 different countries around the world. So to talk a little bit more about the youth network here at the Earth Charter, as we all know, we are the future generations. We are the ones who have the voice, who are going to be dealing with these serious climate issues and critical issues that we'll be facing more seriously later on in the future and that we're dealing with right now as well. So the Earth Charter really counts on a diverse, interactive, and global youth network representing over 100 different countries from around the world, working to promote the principles and the values in their different countries and communities. So those who are embracing the Earth Charter, youth networks, youth organizations, or individuals, they're using it in their studies and their work and their daily lives every day in different ways and different initiatives and projects. And as the youth coordinator, as my role here, I'm really here to help motivate, activate, guide these youth individuals and organizations and inspire them to really use the principles in their daily lives towards a more peaceful world. So a little bit about what I do here at the Secretariat. I facilitate online courses, which I'll talk to you a little bit more later on. I facilitate and carry out workshops here in Costa Rica and also abroad as well, in different countries, mainly at local universities. I also engage well with the volunteer group that we have here, which I'll also go into more detail later on as we talk more about volunteering. We currently have 45 Earthcharter young leaders who are directly in communication with me and with the Earthcharter Youth Network. These are alumni of the online youth courses that we facilitate here out of the Secretariat. And so then they finish the course, they implement the workshop, and now they're part of the Earthcharter Young Leaders Network, where they're actively working with the Earthcharter, communicating with me directly, implementing workshops, and writing articles in their different countries. We've had over 90 different interns from all different walks of life, backgrounds, nationalities over the past years. We've also had over 900 participants in our youth courses since the year 2000. So that's a great number. And over this past year, since I've been here, I just started working here in April of last year. We've had a group of over 40 different volunteers, mainly here at UPeace, at the University for Peace, where we're located. They're students here, and they come and help us with different initiatives such as communication and outreach, community work along here in El Rodeo and Ciudad Colón, the nearest communities near us. Also graphic design, film editing, different tasks, among others. But I also want to mention it's important to note that apart from us four here at the Secretariat, there's four of us full-time. The Earthcharter is completely run by volunteers and volunteer work, and all over different parts of the world. So this is completely volunteer work with their passion, their inspiration, their goodwill of these people's hearts to continue growing this global movement.
Right. So now that you've learned a bit more about the Earthcharter and the things that they do, Christine actually provided us with some good background about Earthcharter initiative and the presence that youth are working toward sustainable values. She'll be talking a little bit later. She mentioned about volunteers, but specifically the impact that they can make in a more sustainable future. Since we are focusing on volunteer impact, I think it's really important to lay the groundwork for the true value of volunteers. There are many organizations around the world that use volunteers in very creative ways to achieve their mission, and volunteers are really valuable. So there have actually been ways in which organizations and even the government has sought to quantify the value of volunteer time. So in terms of the United States, volunteers actually contribute a significant portion of time, and it's calculated as money that goes towards the gross domestic product, or GDP. And volunteer time has actually been calculated as a wage per hour since about the early 2000s. And today, volunteer time is actually worth $24.14 United States dollars an hour. And that actually comes out of the work that is done by an organization called Independent Sector. They do a lot of research regarding volunteers, and they have figured out how to quantify what volunteers are worth per hour. So actually that statistic is as of 2016, and we're actually waiting for the updated calculation because it's anticipated sometime next month. To give you a sense of the scope of volunteerism, just in terms of the United States, I'll get to what the global outlook looks like in a second. There are more than 1.5 million registered groups in the United States, and that doesn't just involve nonprofits or NGOs, as other places around the world refer to nonprofits as. That also includes groups like alumni associations and other types of categories. There are many types of categories in the United States for which groups can operate as a charity. So I guess the better way to address that is that it's as a charity. So it adds up that 1.5 million registered groups. It adds up that 23% of the United States population contributes to volunteer labor. And that actually equals about 5% of the nation's GDP. It's a little over 5%, about 5.3 to be exact. And that actually comes from volunteer work itself. So if those numbers might sound a little small to you, allow me to shed a little bit more light. Those percentages work out to be 63 million Americans providing 8 billion hours of volunteer time. So if you think about that just for a moment, in America alone, a small portion of the total population is contributing more volunteer hours than there are currently people living on Earth, because we have the current count of a little over 7 billion people on the planet. So in terms of the GDP, the gross domestic product, the figure of just over 5% actually equals $193 billion. So if you've ever wondered about the power of volunteers and the value of the work that they do, I think these kinds of figures prove a really significant view that volunteers not only can do a lot for society, but already do. So taking a broader perspective than the United States, it's really quite unfortunate that the volunteer work that is done is not well calculated around the globe. However, there's a United Nations volunteer organization, and they connect volunteers around the world with online tasks that volunteers can do for organizations that need help. But there are not enough statistics to understand what the true impact of that volunteerism is just yet. And so the International Labor Organization, or ILO for short, they also noticed this challenge, this problem that they're having. And as of November of 2017, it was reported by the United Nations Volunteer Organization, or UNV for short, that together with ILO, they will join forces. And I'll actually use a quote. So they say they have joined forces to scale up efforts to improve the global availability, quality, and use of statistics on volunteer work. Starting November 2017, the ILO-UNV partnership will focus on assessing the current status of volunteer work statistics around the world, engage directly with countries to identify good practices and challenges in volunteer work data collection and analysis, as well as develop practical study approaches and tools to support countries' efforts. So certainly volunteer efforts have been ongoing in many countries, and it's clear that the work done contributes value to their societies. The key here, though, is that what ILO and UNV are trying to create is a more uniform mechanism for tracking and supporting volunteer data and analysis. This also helps us shed light on how stakeholders in each nation, where volunteer work is being supported, can be as a measure to sustain the economy. So when people buy into the process, usually it comes from a mix of personal attachment and a sense of duty. So volunteering can be viewed as a way of being a good community member, a good patriot, or even a good world citizen. And the work done as a volunteer is like a social contract, and it should be recognized by governments and other stakeholders for the important contributions that volunteers make. To that end, can you think of some examples of how volunteering contributes to your community? Maybe you have some examples that you can think of. Maybe there isn't one that you can think of, but you might be able to pitch in. We're going to be talking more about how you can do something as a volunteer as well. The question we can then look to is, what are the practical ways in which volunteers contribute to their communities and to their nation and to the world at large? And one of the ways volunteers can practically contribute is by creating quality educational experiences for their communities. The great thing about volunteering is that the educational experience can take place on a level that the volunteer is comfortable with. You choose how you want to interact. And we know from past sessions that informal education happens just as intentionally as formal education, and that the Education for All initiative, what we've been focusing on through the goal 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals, is actually a lifelong learning process. So as a volunteer, your role in whatever sector you choose to contribute your time to can be addressed within the tenets of a culture of peace, which underlines all of the SDGs. We're actually going to be talking about some examples so that you can get a sense of what volunteering looks like, whether in a culture of peace sector like sustainable development, what the Earth Charter Initiative focuses on, or in a sector seemingly unrelated, but you can always incorporate values within a culture of peace within the workplace.
Thank you, Alicia. Wow, I just want to mention those are some staggering numbers. Adding up to 8 billion hours of volunteer work in the US and $193 billion in GDP. That's amazing. I would have never guessed that. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, anytime.
I also want to mention just briefly some insight on volunteer work abroad, for example, in Costa Rica. Just to give you some examples, in Costa Rica, you really see a lot of initiatives and projects and examples of volunteer work that are working towards a culture of peace, which we're going to be talking more about as well, and sustainable development. There are many national parks around Costa Rica that offer an opportunity to help conserve natural habitats and biodiversity and all of our ecosystems, as well as keeping a good, healthy ecotourism mentality and life. Volunteers can help with enrolling in different programs with national parks or with marine parks as well, supporting the development of sustainable rural tourism, field research, citizen science. One of my classmates from my master's program actually did his research and internship here in Costa Rica at an eco lodge in towards like the southwestern part of Costa Rica, and he was studying in a primary forest the carbon sequestration of that primary forest. So he also later, further on down the line, he helped the local landowners developing their land into viable ecotourism opportunities, because it was a small family, owning the land, and they had inherited that land for many years, and so they really didn't have a plan for how to expand and how to long-term see how to conserve and sustain their beautiful land as an ecotouristic area. And so it was kind of an opportunity, a volunteer opportunity for him, benefits both parties, where the family members and the landowners can benefit from Matt's, my colleague's expertise and skills that he learned in his master's program, and then he also had a great opportunity to be able to learn and do his field research in a primary forest. There's also a program called Bandera Azul, or Blue Flag, here in Costa Rica, initiated by the Costa Rican government as part of their initiative to become carbon neutral by 2021. And so this is open to all public and private organizations. You can be a part of this Blue Flag program. It's basically comprised of different evaluations and surveys that you go through to see how environmentally sustainable you are. And so different gold stars are awarded for each section, and once you receive all of your 5 gold stars, you become a Blue Flag member, and you are awarded the coveted Blue Flag, and you're carbon neutral. So this is a great program that was initiated by the Costa Rican government as well, which is volunteer run as well. So how can we look at these examples and think about how these volunteer actions may provide opportunities for transformative education and quality education? I'd like to share with all of you a little bit about how quality education looks like through the Earth Charter lens. So the Earth Charter can be used as an educational tool in non-formal and formal education, because it's an ethical framework, as I mentioned earlier, for building a more just, sustainable, and peaceful society. So it really seeks to inspire a new sense of global interdependence and responsibility for the well-being of all, for the common good. And so I believe that here at the Earth Charter, quality education includes sharing the values and ethics, education on ethical, sustainable systems, including justice and dignity. All of these are really important variables stated within the Earth Charter principles and also used in educational settings. I think that creating safe and healthy environments is definitely essential when you're looking for transformative learning spaces, because it really, when you feel safe and when you're in a healthy environment, it really helps you open up to feel more comfortable and helps you to open up to discuss different topics and different opinions and perspectives that you may not have felt comfortable doing beforehand. I also think that expressing yourself through arts in a creative way and using that to learn is something very powerful. These activities, art or singing or role play, I think these are really great ways to change people's perception on certain issues. And again, making yourself feel comfortable around the rest of the participants. So I really believe that helps with quality education. There's also a famous educator here in Costa Rica, her name is Cruz Prado. She focuses on what she calls eco-pedagogy. And so this is basically, we can say that eco-pedagogy is a way of learning while embodying a culture of peace, because we're really embracing our complex reality today, you know, our crisis, everything happening around the world, embodying all of that, and then but moving away from more simplistic and linear learning towards a more holistic, transformative, and experiential learning, in order, you know, it's seeing the reality, understanding it, having it set in, and then trying to see how we can work towards changing it, having a paradigm shift. And so this can help us find that ecological paradigm shift and help us learn how to live in harmony with others and with all other life on Earth as well. So I'd like to give you all 3 different examples of transformative learning opportunities that we offer here at the Earth Charter, whether they're online or in person at the Earth Charter Education Center, which is our classroom next door. And all of these different programs are developed under the UNESCO Chair on Education for Sustainable Development that the Earth Charter coordinates here, along with the University for Peace. So here at the Earth Charter, we run a 6-month online certificate program in Spanish and Portuguese on education for sustainable development. These are mainly geared towards educators and aiming to strengthen their skills on how to implement ESD into their work and into their lives. So transformative settings and transformative learning spaces. And then also in July, we offer a 1-week intensive program offered here at the Earth Charter Center. This is an actual in-person opportunity. The one previously I mentioned is all online, a 6-month program, online program. But this 1-week intensive program in person is focused on education, ethics, and values for sustainability. So it's a really intensive, transformative teaching learning space where it's offering, again, educators, but also youth are able to apply as well. Anybody who's really interested in the topic, to deepen their understanding on ESD and how to really explore the values of ESD and putting them into educational settings. And then we also offer, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the online youth course that I facilitate 4 times a year. We offer this youth course on leadership, sustainability, and ethics. This is again online. It's over a period of 10 weeks, and we offer it in English and Spanish 4 times a year. And basically, I'm facilitating the course to mobilize youth across the world on different topics such as ethics, sustainability, Earth Charter, systems thinking, and really transform and empower, inspire youth all over the world to take the torch and implement these actions using the Earth Charter and sustainable development and transformative learning in their communities and in their homes and in their countries. So this is something we offer online 4 times a year, and it's also in English. The next one will be available in June. So these 3 courses at the Earth Charter are a way to embed the Earth Charter principles into action and into an education system to create more transformative learning spaces and to mobilize change makers and action-oriented youth around the world, and also educators. I think one important way of knowing that you really are receiving quality education is if you really feel inspired and empowered after leaving the room. So if you're really in a safe and comfortable environment, you are opening up, you're discussing, you're dialoguing, you're talking to your partners and to your group members and sharing ideas, and it's very experiential, it's hands-on and moving around. It's not just the educator speaking or just the teacher speaking, it's everybody dialoguing and speaking. And then you really feel empowered when you're done, and when you leave, I think that's when you can really say that you have received quality and transformative education. I also want to mention that there are, of course, challenges in these types of settings because, like anything in life, there will be challenges that arise, and some challenges to be aware of when you're providing quality education. Not necessarily being the one receiving it, but if you're providing it, just to be aware of communication misinterpretations, because when you have a diverse audience nowadays as a globalized society, we have people all over the world in different countries. Just be aware of your audience, be prepared, be aware of the diversity, be prepared for culture, study up on the cultural norms of your audience and know how to deliver your message. I think that this is extremely important. And from then on, if you do that from the very beginning, you'll feel very respected, and you'll feel comfortable also, giving the education that you want to give, the right education you want to give. So, Alicia, if you have anything else you'd like to add, Well, so we can go on to what are some examples of how volunteers have in the past or presently included the Earth Charter, volunteered using the Earth Charter. So specifically with the Earth Charter volunteers here, we have recently been working on building a very strong relationship with our neighbor community, El Rodeo, which is just about 2 kilometers from University for Peace here, right next to us. We're doing this by leading workshops, planning workshops. We haven't actually implemented them yet, but we have this very strong group of volunteers who are planning different workshops at the schools in El Rodeo and in the next nearby town, Ciudad Colón. We really are trying to transform the recycling projects here and the recycling mentality in this area because we see that it's very weak. So along with the Earth Charter students, the UP students and the Earth Charter volunteers, we're really trying to come in, work with the communities, invite them to events. We have a big Earth Day event coming up soon on April 22nd on Earth Day. And so we really want to invite vendors, the local community, musicians, the school, include the municipality in order to really restore relationships that may have been lost in the past. We're also working on building a relationship with Kitirisi, which is the nearest indigenous community next to University for Peace and the Earth Charter. And so I believe that this work, all of this work that I'm mentioning here with the volunteers, community work, I really think that it integrates very, very strongly with a culture of peace because we're bonding groups here. We're bonding ties. We're finding commonalities. We're not looking at our differences. We're trying to find commonalities to continue to work towards a more sustainable future. And we're starting the conversation. We're not only talking about it, but we're actually going to put it in action and put it into practice. And I think that's something that's very important.
Absolutely. Actually, to that end, the important aspects of making quality educational experiences that Christine's examples point out are that you should be collaborating with others. She talked about building bridges within the community, looking at commonalities and not differences. This is really important. In addition to making sure that there are ways of understanding the cultural norms around you. This creates dialogue, it creates opportunity. And since this is a lifelong learning process in terms of the culture of peace, but also just understanding education and education for all, quality educational experiences should be vast enough to challenge you. Christine talked a lot about empowerment, that's important. And it should be challenging for others as well, without creating some sort of hierarchy that leads to levels of exclusion. We all have to work together to maintain a culture of peace, and one of those factors of a culture of peace is actually the creating of dialogue, understanding, seeking to understand, and also having solidarity. And that's how you really get to that level with some of the ways that Christine has really excellently pointed out in her examples about how just seeking out what is needed in the community, noticing something, starting the dialogue, and putting these words, these values into action. So we're going to talk a little bit about some concrete ways to incorporate a culture of peace in your role. Christine touched on it a bit, but we're going to expand on it so that you can really get a sense of how you can just get started. Sometimes people don't know how to get started. Sometimes people just need to be assured by hearing it come out of someone else's mouth. So we hope that today we'll be able to do that for you. A concrete way that you can incorporate a culture of peace as a volunteer is to seek to build bridges with active listening. So the part about reaching out to people, this requires for you to first listen and to actively listen. This means sitting back and listening to your colleagues and taking pieces of what people agree on to map out a road of general consensus on how to move forward. So if you're a visual person like me, you can do what I sometimes do. I actually write down each idea as things come about in a group setting and include my own, whatever I have put forward to the group. And then I like to try and see how each one of the perspectives that were received with the most positive responses from people, how it contributes to the overall picture. And sometimes people need to see and hear how much of what is being said represents a particular vision. So this also ties into understanding cultural norms. So even though you might read up on a culture, even though you might have experienced a culture, there's always nuances that happen. People actually have more differences in personality than anything else. And so it doesn't mean that the people are going to stick to a strict guideline for their particular culture. It just means that they readily can identify with it, but they may or may not personally use that level in their life. So this is where the having a conversation and building bridges and seeking to understand comes in. And when you are able to reflect back to people, they're able to then tell you, make adjustments, or so on and so forth. So when you have the full picture, you can present it back to the group, and then that can really get the group going on reflecting on what people want versus what people are actually demonstrating. And this can sometimes cause tense conversations, but I want to be clear that we shouldn't be shy about having tense conversations. It really leads into actually my second point about the concrete way to incorporate the culture of peace, which is these tense conversations can still be done in a way that reduce interpersonal conflict by having guidelines on how to engage with each other throughout your time working together. So the reality is that when you are a volunteer, you're doing a specific job at that time, and you're expected to react every bit of professional as someone who's getting paid. So many places have codes of conduct and some do not, but perhaps that is where something that you can contribute to get the consensus going among your colleagues, and using the dialoguing and understanding, seeking to understand where people are coming from, mapping out a common road that people are seeming to agree upon, and also debating the things that you don't agree on, and doing that in a respectful manner, that this can help create a greater sense of how to move forward.
Examples as, oh, can you all hear me? Yes, okay. I also have some very similar concrete examples of how we can, as volunteers, embody the culture of peace. Something very similar to what you mentioned. I think building strong relationships and partnerships with your neighbors is very important. And one really important step to doing that is, as Alicia mentioned, is listening. Start by listening. So with the same idea here, I want to give you a little bit of an example of how, one of our projects has been started with listening. We here at the Earth Charter are in the process of creating an integral climate park. And this is basically an initiative led by an Earth Charter affiliate, Bjorn Heyerdahl from South Africa, who uses the Earth Charter as a framework and as a guideline in every integral climate park that he implements around the world. So he's done numerous around the world in different countries, in Norway, Italy, the UAE currently right now. And he came to the University for Peace and the Earth Charter in November, and he noticed this is a perfect place to do this park. And he uses the Earth Charter as a guideline in everything that he does with these parks. And so this integral climate park basically integrates the university setting, education setting, with the municipality, with the local community, communities here at El Rodeo and Ciudad Colón, which I've mentioned earlier, the indigenous groups, the students, every actor, everybody around they're all integrated as a whole and living in a sustainable system. So living in a sustainable area where we're taking care of our natural ecosystems, the rivers, the forests, our water, everything. And so we're currently in the process of creating this. Now, this is a huge initiative, and this is going to take some time. So we say, where do we start with all of this? And the way we started was by literally listening to all of the parties and all of the stakeholders. So we went around setting up meetings with each stakeholder. And at each meeting, we were kind of just the listener. So we wanted to hear what's been done before, what's the problem, how can we help build this relationship that's been torn in the past, or maybe that's been lost, or maybe that there never was a relationship. So again, just as Alicia mentioned, just listening and mapping things out, writing things out, and seeing where you can connect the dots and then further the process from there. So I think that's very important. to get a project off the ground, and even to just start a relationship, even just to build a relationship, whether it be a friendship or something more serious. I also want to invite you, as a concrete example, I also want to invite you to also use the Earth Charter during your events and your work and your life and any context, because the Earth Charter, as Bjorn uses it, as all these other people and organizations and governments use it in their work and in their lives, I think it's a really helpful, a beautiful tool to embody the culture of peace, because we're really speaking here about nonviolence, tolerance, and peace, and helping bridge those those relationships and bridge nations, and help all of us see the importance of respecting others and living in community and harmony with life on earth.
Yeah, those are actually excellent points that Christine brings up. A way to really bring to life the example of active listening and working together. I'm actually going to switch gears just a little bit, but this definitely is something that is important. It's part of the culture of peace for sure. It's something that is also integrated within the Earth Charter itself, and that's the idea of having gender equality and equity. And so you might think, well, how exactly am I supposed to do that? There's certainly big things that are being done about that, and those are very important. But you want to make sure that you have female voices and the work that females do respected on par with that of males. So, of course, this sounds a bit heavy, but the reality is that there's a combination of one-to-one and group interactions that actually make the difference. So we have these large initiatives, he for she, for example, and those are important to have. We want people to be motivated and to share how they are making a difference and closing the gender parity gap, as it's called. Right now we have CSW going on, 62. The Commission for the Status of Women is in its 62nd session. And they're talking about how to have better access and opportunities for specifically rural women and girls. And of course, just looking at the overall status of women across the world. But what you'll find often is that it's just everyday things, interaction to interaction. And this is where we want to focus our attention and helping you to just start thinking about that, because as you start to think about that, you will start to react on it. And we want you to react in positive ways that promote the culture of peace and help sustain it. So what does that look like? Okay, so let's talk about that. It's explicitly things like not allowing disparaging language and practicing listening when there's feedback about the experiences that females are having that might be negative. It could also actually be positive, and because you want to make sure that you're preserving the things that work while trying to do away with the things that don't work. And people don't like hearing a lot of negative things, so you definitely want to focus again, like on the things that work, as a way to usher forward a greater understanding in your space, but not to the point of forgetting or dismissing these things that are actually really important. That's not so great to think about. Part of sexism is that there's a social silencing of female voices, and it's through things like shunning her ideas, not believing her when she says something, or taking her seriously with her comments, and constantly pushing her to negotiate boundaries and terms that she's already explicitly set. To the point where it becomes harassment and intimidation. So this is really interesting. There's been articles about this. The last that I remember looking at something like this that was like a real world example of it was that a coworker decided that he was going to pose as one of his female employees because he kept hearing, female colleagues, and he kept hearing that she was feeling like she had to say things over and over, that she really wasn't being listened to, and it made her feel disrespected, right? Just to put it simply. And what he did was he started signing emails as a female. And it was very interesting because he noticed that he spent more time sending emails saying the same things over and over and over to his male colleagues. Whereas when he posed as a male, he didn't have quite as much conversations back and forth. It was just sort of taken as a level of authority that he was able to put forward. His expertise, in other words, was not on the line at all times. So that's just a really quick, simplified example, but it's something that's very real for women in the workplace, and it happens around the world. So particularly women in positions of leadership, there's all kinds of studies where there's a lot of pushback that can happen in the workplace with men who begin to feel threatened by women leadership. They don't feel as if they are going to have an environment that they can really contribute to as much or be taken as seriously. And that's the time to step up, right? So the question is not how are things going to change negatively as a result of female leadership. The question is, how can we sustain this leadership in a way that is going to be beneficial for everyone, and making sure that the female leadership and the female colleagues are also supported and respected. So that takes a little bit of a turn in the conversation. It makes it a little bit more positive, but it also helps people to be able to confront having the type of dialogue that really it takes to map out what would actually work in your particular situation. So if you really think about it in terms of males and what they say, think for yourself, you know, just do some reading, if you will, dive into some formal research. We definitely encourage you to do that in addition to the things that we talk about here. But what you will find, I can pretty much guarantee it as a female myself, you will definitely find that there are some obstacles that females are facing that are common across the world. And so once you start there, then you can start really addressing ways that you can support female colleagues regardless of your gender. And this is important because frankly, the issue is not just about male treatment of females. I don't want that to be misunderstood. Females are also sometimes obstacles in empowerment, and there's all kinds of reasons why we straddle all different types of identities at different times. There's power and privilege that come with different structures, and we still have a lot of social elements today that impede people from being able to have the quality of life that would even be conducive for a culture of peace, right? But the key is not to really view things as a zero-sum game. You supporting others doesn't take away from your shine. Christine, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that, if you can also see how this would be beneficial. Okay.
Hi, Alicia. Sorry, I was just unmuting myself. I agree. You know, I think this is a very important topic that sometimes is kind of brushed under the rug and not thought about. And I think that it's an issue all across the world, not just in the U.S., but in many different work settings. And more you see women standing up for their rights and to be more respected. So I think it's a wave that is becoming more aware, and people are starting to wake up to it. So that's to me, it's empowering and inspiring.
Definitely. So I just want to thank everybody for coming today. We hope that we've given you a lot to think about and how you can become a volunteer and all the ways that you can contribute to a culture of peace, no matter where you start. And you're more than welcome to venture into volunteerism with us at IOTA World. We're 100% volunteer operations. So feel free to check out some of our positions we have available, and we have some more coming in the future.
Thank you, Alicia. You are right as well. And we are, thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar. I enjoyed it. I hope that it was beneficial and useful for all of you. Again, feel free to reach out to me at the my email, youthcoordinator@earthcharter.org for any questions. We also have volunteer opportunities abroad as well. If you're in different countries, you're more than welcome to partake and participate with us. Follow our Facebook at the Earth Charter, and we also have an Instagram with the handle Earth Charter International. And we also have a very neat app called Mapting. It's available on Android or iOS. It's a free app to learn more about the SDGs and the Earth Charter principles, and to connect with all of their Mapting users across the world to see how people are implementing sustainable actions across the world. So thank you so much, Alicia. I appreciate it.
All right. So as you're checking out Earth Charter, just know that we have one session left in our theme for POP this year, and we actually don't have a session next week. It's going to be the week after. So on Thursday, April 5th, you can join us at 1500 UTC on YouTube Live, and we'll be exploring some challenges to education. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.